by Terry Pratchett and Neil Gaiman. If you haven't caught on, or if you're just now, getting into the book reading, I recommend going to part one. Hearing this story from the get-go, because, it's not going to make a whole lot of sense if you catch the book at the end. So, yes, anyway, without further ado, let's continue. It looked a little like a maggot, a huge, angry maggot made out of thousands and thousands of tiny little maggots, all writhing and screaming, millions of little maggot mouths opening and shutting in a fury, and every one of them was screaming, "Crowley!" It stopped screaming, swayed blindly, seemed to be taking stock of where it was. Then it went to pieces. The thing split into thousands of writhing gray maggots. They flowed over the carpet, up over the desks, over Lisa Morrow and her 9 colleagues. They flowed into their mouths, up their nostrils, into their lungs. And they burrowed into flesh and eyes and brains and lights, and reproducing wildly as they went, filling the room with a towering mess of writhing flesh and gunk. And the whole began to flow together, to coagulate into one huge entity that filled the room from floor to ceiling, pulsing gently. A mouth opened in the mass of flesh, strands of something wet and sticky adhering to each of the not exactly lips, and Hester said, "I needed that." Spending half an hour trapped on an answerphone with only Aziraphale's message for company had not improved his temper. Neither did the prospect of having to report back to Hell, having to explain why he hadn't returned half an hour earlier, and more importantly, why he was not accompanied by Crowley. Hell did not go a bundle on failures. On the plus side, however, he at least knew what Aziraphale's message was. The knowledge could probably buy him his continued existence, and anyway, he reflected, if he were going to have to face the possible wrath of the Dark Council, at least it wouldn't be on an empty stomach. The room filled with thick, sulphurous smoke. When it cleared, Hester was gone. There was nothing left in the room but 10 skeletons, picked quite clean of meat, and some puddles of melted plastic with here and there a gleaming fragment of metal that might once have been part of a telephone. Much better to have been a dental assistant. But to look on the bright side, all this only went to prove that evil contains the seeds of its own destruction. Right now, across the country, people who would otherwise have been made just that little bit more tense and angry by being summoned from a nice bath or having their names mispronounced at them, were instead feeling quite untroubled and at peace with the world. As a result of Hester's action, a wave of low-grade goodness started to spread exponentially through the population, and millions of people who ultimately would have suffered minor bruises of the soul did not in fact do so. So that was all right. You wouldn't have known it was the same car. There was scarcely an inch of it undented. Both front lights were smashed, the hubcaps were long gone. It looked like the veteran of 100 demolition derbies. The pavements had been bad. The pedestrian underpass had been worse. The worst bit had been crossing the River Thames. At least he'd had the foresight to roll up all the windows. Still, he was here now. In a few hundred yards, he'd be on the M40, a fairly clear run up to Oxfordshire. There was only one snag. Once more, between Crowley and the open road was M25, a screaming, glowing ribbon of pain and dark light, Odegra. Nothing could cross it and survive, nothing mortal anyway, and he wasn't sure what it would do to a demon. It wouldn't kill him, but it wouldn't be pleasant. There was a police roadblock in front of the flyover before him. Burnt out wrecks, some still burning, testified to the fate of previous cars that had to drive across the flyover above the dark road. The police did not look happy. Crowley shifted down into second gear and gunned the accelerator. He went through the roadblock at 60. That was the easy bit. Cases of spontaneous human combustion are on record all over the world. One minute, someone's quite happily chugging along with their life. The next, there's a sad photograph of a pile of ashes and a lonely and mysteriously uncharred foot or hand. Cases of spontaneous vehicular combustion are less well documented. Whatever the statistics were, they had just gone up by one. The leather seat covers began to smoke. Staring ahead of him, Crowley fumbled left-handedly on the passenger seat for Agnes Nutter's nice and accurate prophecies, moved it to the safety of his lap. He wished she'd prophesied this. Then the flames engulfed the car. He had to keep driving. On the other side of the flyover was a further police roadblock to prevent the passage of cars trying to come into London. They were laughing about a story that had just come over the radio that a motorbike cop on the M6 had flagged down a stolen police car only to discover the driver to be a large octopus. Some police forces would believe anything. Not the Metropolitan Police, though. The Met was the hardest, most cynically pragmatic, most stubbornly down-to-earth police force in Britain. She had predicted it, and it read, "A street of light will scream, the black chariot of the serpent will flame, and a queen will sing quicksilver songs no more." Most of the family had gone along with the Gelatley device, who wrote a brief monograph in the 1830s explaining it as a metaphor for the banishment of Weishaupt's Illuminati from Bavaria in 1785. It would take a lot to phase a copper from the Met. It would take, for example, a huge battered car that was nothing more nor less than a fireball, a blazing, roaring, twisted metal lemon from hell. Driven by a grinning lunatic in sunglasses sitting amid the flames, trailing thick black smoke coming straight at them through the lashing rain and the wind at 80 miles per hour, I would do it every time. The quarry was the calm center of a stormy world. Let me restate it. The quarry was the calm center of a stormy world. Thunder didn't just rumble overhead, it tore the air in half. "I've got some more friends coming," Adam repeated. "They'll be here soon, and then we can really get started." The dog started to howl. It was no longer the siren howl of a lone wolf, but the weird oscillations of a small dog in deep trouble. Pepper had been staring at her knees. There seemed to be something on her mind. Finally, she looked up and stared at him in the blank gray eyes. "What bit are you going to have?" Adam said. "What bit are you going to have, Adam?" she said. The storm was replaced by a sudden ringing silence. "What?" said Adam. "Well, you've divided up the world, right? And we've all got to have a bit, but what bit are you going to have?" The silence sang like a harp high and thin. "Yeah," said Brian, "you never told us what bit you're having." "Pepper's right," said Wensleydale. "Don't seem to me there's much left if we've got to have all these countries." Adam's mouth opened and shut. "What?" he said. "What bit's yours, Adam?" said Pepper. Adam stared at her. Dog had stopped howling and had fixed his master with an intent, thoughtful mongrel stare. Me?" he said. The silence went on and on, one note that could drown out the noises of the world. "But I'll have Tatfield," said Adam. They stared at him. And Lower Tadfield and Norton Woods. They still stared. Adam's gaze dragged itself across their faces. They're all I've ever wanted, he said. They shook their heads. I can have him if I want, said Adam, his voice tinged with sullen defiance and his defiance edged with sudden doubt. I can make them better, too. Better trees to climb, better ponds, better... His voice trailed off. You can't, said Wensleydale flatly. They're not like America and those places. They're really real. Anyway, they belong to all of us. They're ours. And you couldn't make them better, said Brian. Anyway, even if you did, we'd all know, said Pepper. Oh, if that's all that's worrying you, don't worry, said Adam airily, 'cause I could make you all just do whatever I wanted. He stopped, his ears listening in horror to the words his mouth was speaking. The them were backing away. Dog put his paws over his head. Adam's face looked like an impersonation of the collapse of empire. No, he said hoarsely. No, come back, I command you. They froze in mid-dash. Adam stared. No, I didn't mean it. He began. You're my friends. His body jerked. His head was thrown back. He raised his arms and pounded the skies with his fists. His face twisted. The chalk floor cracked under his sneakers. Adam opened his mouth and screamed. It was a sound that a merely mortal throat should not have been able to utter. It wound out of the quarry, mingled with the storm, caused the clouds to curdle into new and unpleasant shapes. It went on and on. It resounded around the universe, which is a good deal smaller than physicists would believe. It rattled the celestial spheres. It spoke of loss, and it did not stop for a very long time. And then it did. Something drained away. Adam's head tilted down again. His eyes opened. Whatever had been standing in the old quarry before, Adam Young was standing there now. A more knowledgeable Adam Young, but Adam Young nevertheless. Possibly more of Adam Young than there had ever been before. The ghastly silence in the quarry was replaced by a more familiar, comfortable silence. The mere and simple absence of noise. The freed them cowered against the chalk cliff, their eyes fixed on him. It's all right, said Adam quietly. Pepper, Wensley, Brian, come back here. It's all right. It's all right. I know everything now, and you've got to help me. Otherwise, it's all going to happen. It's really all going to happen. It's all going to happen if we don't do something. The Fleming and Jasmine cottage heaved and rattled and showered Newt with water that was slightly khaki in color. But it was cold. It was probably the coldest cold shower Newt had ever had in his life. It didn't do any good. There's a red sky, he said. When he came back, he was feeling slightly manic. At 4:30 in the afternoon in August. What does that mean? In terms of delighted nautical operatives, would you say? I mean, if it takes the red sky at night to delight a sailor, what does it take to amuse the man who operates the computers on a super tanker? Or is it shepherds who are delighted in the night? I can never remember. Funny you should mention it, because just a couple of years ago we had a red sky right here in Oregon. Anathema eyed the plaster in his hair. The shower hadn't got rid of it. It had merely dampened it down and spread it out, so that Newt looked as though he was wearing a white hat with hair in it. You must have got quite a bump, she said. No, that was when I hit my head on the wall. You know, when you... Yes, Anathema looked quizzically out of the broken window. Would you say it's blood-colored, she said. It's very important. I wouldn't say that, said Newt. His train of thought temporarily derailed. Not actual blood, more pinkish. Probably the storm put a lot of dust in the air. Anathema was rummaging through the nice and accurate prophecies. "What were you doing?" he said. "Trying to cross-reference." "I still can't be." "I don't think you need to bother," said Newt. "I know what the rest of 3477 means. It came to me when I..." "What do you mean, you know what it means?" "Saw it on my way down here, and don't snap like that, my head aches. I mean it when I saw it. They've got it written down outside that airbase of yours. It's got nothing to do with peace. Peace is our profession. It's the kind of thing they put up on the boards outside air bases, you know. SAC 86-57745 wing. The screaming blue demons. Peace is our profession, that sort of thing." Newt clutched his head. The euphoria was definitely fading. If Agnes is right, then there's probably some madman in there right now, winding up all the missiles and cranking open the launch windows, or whatever they are. "No, there isn't," said Anathema firmly. "Oh, yes? I've seen films. Name me one good reason why you can be so sure." "There aren't any bombs there, or missiles, or... Everyone else around here knows that. But it's an air base. It's got runways. That's just for transport planes and things. All they've got up there is communication gears, radios, and stuff. Nothing explosive at all." Newt stared at her. Here, I'm going to pause real fast. Alright, I'm back. Look at Crowley, doing 110 miles per hour on the M40, heading toward Oxfordshire, even the most resolutely casual observer would notice a number of strange things about him. The clenched teeth, for example, or the dull red glow coming from behind his sunglasses. In the car was definitely a hint. Crowley had started the journey in his Bentley, and he was damned if he wasn't going to finish it in the Bentley as well. Not that even the kind of car buff who owns his own pair of motoring goggles would have been able to tell it was a vintage Bentley. Not anymore. They wouldn't have been able to tell that it was a Bentley. They would only offer 50-50 that it had ever even been a car. There was no paint left on it, for a start. It might still have been black. There wasn't a rusty, smudged reddish brown, but this was a dull charcoal black. It traveled in its own ball of flame, like a space capsule, making a particularly difficult re-entry. There was a thin skin of crusted, melted rubber left around the metal wheel rims, but seeing that the wheel rims were still somehow riding an inch above the road surface, this didn't seem to make an awful lot of difference to the suspension. It should have fallen apart miles back, and it was the effort of holding it together that was causing Crowley to grit his teeth, and the biospatial feedback that was causing the bright red eyes, that in the effort of having to remember not to start breathing. He hadn't felt like this since the 14th century. The atmosphere in the quarry was friendlier now, but still intense. You've got to help me sort it out," said Adam. "People have been trying to sort it out for thousands of years, but we've got to sort it out now." They nodded helpfully. "You see, the thing is," said Adam, it's like, well, you know, Greasy Johnson." Them nodded. They all knew Greasy Johnson and the members of the other gang in Lower Tadfield. They were older, not very pleasant. Hardly a week went by without a skirmish. "Well," said Adam, "we always win, right?" "Nearly always," said Wensleydale. "Nearly always," said Adam, "and more than half anyway," said Pepper. "'Cause you remember when there was all that fuss over the old folks' party in the village hall when we..." "That doesn't count," said Adam. "They got told off just as much as us. Anyway, old folks are supposed to like listening to the sound of children playing, I read that somewhere. I don't see why we should get told off because we've got the wrong kind of old folks. He paused. Anyway, we're better than them. Oh, we're better than them, said Pepper. You're right about that. We're better than them, all right. We just don't always win. Just suppose, said Adam slowly, how we could beat them properly. Get them sent away or something. Just make sure there's no more old gangs in Lower Tadfield apart from us. What do you think about that? What you mean? He'd be dead? Said Brian. No, just gone away. The them thought about this. Greasy Johnson had been a fact of life ever since they'd been old enough to hit one another with a toy railway engine. They tried to get their minds around the concept of a world without a Johnson-shaped hole in it. Brian scratched his nose. I reckon it'd be brilliant without Greasy Johnson, he said. Remember what he did at my birthday party and I got into trouble about it? I don't know, said Pepper. I mean, it wouldn't be so interesting without old Greasy Johnson and his gang, when you think about it. We've had a lot of fun with old Greasy Johnson and the Johnsonites. We'd probably have to find some other gang or something. Seems to me, said Wensleydale. If you ask people in Lower Tadfield, they'd say they'd be better off without the Johnsonites or the them. Adam looked shocked at this. Wensleydale went on stoically. The old folks club would, and picky, but we're the good ones, Brian began. He hesitated. All right, he said, but I bet they'd think it'd be a jolly sight less interesting if we all weren't here. Yes, said Wensleydale. That's what I mean. People around here don't want us or the Johnsonites, he went on morosely. The way they're always going on about us just riding our bikes or skateboarding on their pavements and making too much noise and stuff. It's like the man said in the history books. A plaque on both your houses. He meant plague. This met with silence. One of those blue ones, said Brian eventually. Saying Adam Young lived here, or something. Normally, an opening like this could lead to 5 minutes of rambling discussion when the them were in the mood, but Adam felt that this was not the time. What you're all saying, he summed up in his best chairman tones, is that it wouldn't be any good at all if the Greasy Johnsonites beat the them or the other way around. That's right, said Pepper, because, she added, if we beat them, we'd have to be our own deadly enemies. It'd be me and Adam against Brian and Wensley. She sat back. Everyone needs a Greasy Johnson, she said. Yeah, said Adam. That's what I thought. It's no good anyone winning. That's what I thought. He stared at Dog, or through Dog. Seems simple enough to me, said Wensleydale. Sitting back, I don't see why it's taken thousands of years to sort out. That's because people are trying to sort it out. That's because the people trying to sort it out were men, said Pepper meaningfully. Don't see why you have to take sides, said Wensleydale. Of course I have to take sides, said Pepper. Everyone has to take sides in something. Adam appeared to reach a decision. Yes, but I reckon you can make your own side. I think you'd better go and get your bikes, he said quietly. I think we'd better sort of go and talk to some people. Put, went Madame Tracy's motor scooter down the Crouch End High Street. It was the only vehicle moving on a suburban London street, jammed with immobile cars and taxis and red London buses. I've never seen a traffic jam like this, said Madame Tracy. I wonder if there's been an accident. Quite possibly, said Aziraphale. And then, Mr. Shadwell, unless you put your arms around me, you're going to fall off. This thing wasn't built for two people, you know. 3, muttered Shadwell, gripping the seat with one white-knuckled hand and his thunder gun in the other. Mr. Shadwell, I won't tell you again. You'll have to stop, then, so as I can adjust me weapon, sighed Shadwell. Madame Tracy giggled dutifully, but she pulled over to the curb and stopped the motor scooter. Shadwell sorted himself out and put 2 grudging arms around Madame Tracy while the thunder gun struck up between them like a chaperone. They rode through the rain without talking for another 10 minutes. But, as Madame Tracy carefully negotiated her way around the cars and buses. Madame Tracy found her eyes being moved down the speedometer rather foolishly. She thought, since it hadn't worked since 1974, and it hadn't worked very well before that. Dear lady, how fast would you say we're going? Asked Aziraphale. Why? Because it seems to me that we would go slightly faster walking. Well, with just me on, the top speed is about 15 miles an hour, but with Mr. Shadwell as well, must be 4 or 5 miles per hour, she interrupted. Suppose so, she agreed. There was a cough from behind her. Can ye no slow down this hellish machine, woman? Asked an ashen voice in the infernal pantheon, which, it goes without saying, Shadwell hated uniformly and correctly. Shadwell reserved a special loathing for speed demons. In which case, said Aziraphale, we will get to Tadfield in something less than 10 hours. There was a pause from Madame Tracy then. How far away is this Tadfield anyway? About 40 miles. Said Madame Tracy, who had once driven the scooter a few miles to nearby Finchley to visit her niece, but it had taken the bus since because of the funny noises the scooter had started making on the way back. We should really be going at about 70 if we're going to get there in time, said Aziraphale. Sergeant Shadwell, hold on very tightly now. Put, 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 put. And a blue nimbus began to outline the scooter and its occupants with a gentle sort of glow, like an afterimage all around them. Put, 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 put. And the scooter lifted awkwardly off the ground with no visible means of support, jerking slightly until it reached a height of 5 feet, more or less. Don't look down, Sergeant Shadwell, advised Aziraphale. Said Shadwell. Eyes screwed tightly shut, gray forehead beaded with sweat, not looking down and not looking anywhere. And off we go then. In every big budget science fiction movie, there's the moment when a spaceship as large as New York suddenly goes to light speed. A twanging noise like a wooden ruler began being plucked over the edge of the desk. A dazzling refraction of light, and suddenly the stars have all been stretched out thin, and it's gone. This was exactly like that, except that instead of a gleaming 12-mile-long spaceship, it was an off-white 20-year-old motor scooter, and you didn't have the special rainbow effects, and it probably wasn't going at more than 200 miles an hour, and instead of a pulsing whine sliding up to the octaves, it just went put, 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 droosh. But it was exactly like that anyway. Where the M25 now, a screaming frozen circle intersects the M40 to Oxfordshire, police were clustered around in ever-increasing quantities. Since Crowley crossed the divide half an hour earlier, their number had doubled. On the M40 side, anyway, no one in London was getting out. In addition to the police, there were also approximately 200 others standing around and inspecting the M25 through binoculars. They included representatives from Her Majesty's Army, the Bomb Disposal Squad, M1, MI5, MI6, the Special Branch, and the CIA. There was also a man selling hot dogs. Everybody was cold and wet and puzzled and irritable, with the exception of one police officer who was cold, wet, puzzled, irritable, and exasperated. "Look, I don't care if you believe me or not," he sighed. "I'm telling you is that what I saw, it was an old car, a Rolls or a Bentley, one of those flash vintage jobs, and it made it over the bridge." One of the senior Army technicians interrupted. "It can't have been done. According to our instruments, the temperature above the M25 is somewhere in excess of 700 degrees centigrade, or 140 degrees below," added his assistant. Or 140 degrees below zero, agreed the senior technicians. "There does appear to be some confusion on that score, although I think we can safely attribute it to mechanical error of some kind. But the fact remains that we can't even get a helicopter directly over the M25 without winding up with helicopter McNuggets. How on earth can you tell me that a vintage car drove over it unharmed?" "I didn't say it drove over it unharmed," corrected the policeman, who was thinking seriously about leaving the Metropolitan Police and going into business with his brother, who was resigning his job with the electricity board and was going to start breeding chickens. "It burst into flames and it just kept on going." "Do you seriously expect any of us to believe?" began somebody high-pitched. This high-pitched keening noise, haunting and strange, like 1,000 glass harmonicas being played in unison, all slightly off-key, like the sound of the molecules of the air itself wailing in pain, and whoosh. Over their heads it sailed, 40 feet in the air, engulfed in a deep blue nimbus, which faded to red at the edges. A little white motor scooter, and riding it, a middle-aged woman in a pink helmet, and holding tightly to her a short man in a Macintosh and a day-glow green crash helmet. The motor scooter was too far up for anyone to see that his eyes were tightly shut, but they were. The woman was screaming. What she was screaming was this: "Geronimo!" One of the advantages of the wasabi was, or as Newt was always keen to point out, was that when it went badly damaged, it was very hard to tell. I knew it had to keep driving Dick Turpin onto the shoulder to avoid fallen branches. "You've made me drop all the cards on the floor." The car thumped back onto the road. A small voice from somewhere under the glove compartment said, "Oil pleasure alert." "I'll never be able to sort them out now," she moaned. "You don't have to," said Newt manically. "Just pick one. Anyone. It won't matter." "What do you mean?" "Well, if Agnes is right and we're doing all this because she's predicted it, then any card picked right now got to be relevant. That's logic. It's nonsense." "Yeah? Look, you're even here because she predicted it, and have you thought what we're going to say to the Colonel if we get to see him, which of course we won't? If we're reasonable. Listen, I know these kinds of places. They have huge gods. They're to guard the gates, anathema, and they have white helmets and real guns. You understand, which fire real bullets made of real lead, which can go right into you and bounce around and come out of the same hole before you can even say, 'Excuse me, we have a reason to believe the World War III is due any minute, and they're going to do the show right here.' And then they have Serious men in suits with bulging jackets who take you into a little room without windows and ask you questions like, are you now or have you ever been a member of Pinko subversive organization such as any British political party? And we're nearly there. Look, it's got gates and wire fences and everything, and probably the kind of dogs that eat people. I think you're getting rather overexcited, said Anathema, quietly picking the last of the file cards up from the floor of the car. Overexcited? No. I'm getting very calmly worried that someone might shoot me. I'm sure Agnes would have mentioned it if we were going to be shot. She's very good at that sort of thing. She began absent-mindedly to shuffle the file cards. You know, she said, carefully cutting the cards and rifling the two piles together. I read somewhere that there's a sect that believes that computers are the tools of the devil. They say that Armageddon will come about because of the Antichrist being good with computers. Apparently, it's mentioned somewhere in Revelations. I think I must have read about it in a newspaper recently. Daily Mail, letter from America, August the 3rd, said Newt. Just after the story about the woman in Worms, Nebraska, who taught her duck to play the accordion. Said Anathema, spreading the cards face down on her lap. So, computers are tools of the devil, thought Newt. He had no problem believing it. Computers had to be tools of somebody, and all he knew for certain was that it definitely wasn't him. The car jerked to a halt. The air base looked battered. Several large trees had fallen down near the entrance, and some men with a digger were trying to shift them. The guard on duty was watching them disinterestedly, but he half turned and looked coldly at the car. All right, said Newt, pick a card. 3001. Behind the eagle's nest, a great ash hath fallen. Is that all? Yes. We always thought it was something to do with the Russian Revolution. Keep going along all this road and turn left. The turning led to a narrow lane with the base's perimeter fence on the left-hand side. Now pull in there. There's often cars in here, and no one will take any notice, said Anathema. What is this place? It's a local lover's lane. Is that why it appears to be paved with rubber? They walked along the hedge-shaded lane for 100 yards until they reached the ash tree. Agnes had been right. It was quite great. It had fallen right across the fence. A guard was sitting on it, smoking a cigarette. He was black. Newt always felt guilty in the presence of black Americans, in case they blamed him for 200 years of slave trading. The man stood up when they approached and then sagged into an easier stance. Oh, hi, Anathema, he said. Hi, George. Terrible storm, isn't it? Sure was. They walked on. He watched them out of sight. You know him, said Newt with a forced nonchalance. Oh, sure. Sometimes a few of them come down to the pub, pleasant enough in a well-scrubbed way. Would he shoot us if we walked in? Said Newt. He might well point a gun at us in a menacing way, Anathema conceded. That's good enough for me. What do you suggest we do, then? Well, Agnes must have known something, so I suppose we just wait. It's not too bad now the wind's gone down. Oh! Newt looked at the clouds piling up on the horizon. Good old Agnes, he said. Let me adjust. Adam pedaled steadily along the road, dog running along behind him and occasionally trying to bite his back tire out of sheer excitement. There was a clacking noise and Pepper swung out of her drive. You could always tell Pepper's bike She thought it was improved by a piece of cardboard cunningly held against the wheel by a clothes peg. Katz had learned to take evasive action when she was 2 streets away. "I reckon we can cut along Drover's Lane and then up through Roundhead Woods," said Pepper. "It's all muddy," said Adam. "That's right," said Pepper nervously. "Gets all muddy up there. We ought to go along the way by the chalk pit. It's always dry because of the chalk, and then up by the sewage farm." Brian and Wensleydale pulled in behind them. Wensleydale's bicycle was black and shiny and sensible. Brian's might have been white once, but its color was lost beneath the thick layer of mud. "Stupid calling it a military base," said Pepper. "I went up there when they had that open one day, and there was no guns or missiles or anything. Just knobs and dials and brass bands playing." "Yes," said Adam. "Not much military about knobs and dials," said Pepper. "I don't know, really," said Adam. "It's amazing what you can do with knobs and dials." "I got a kit for Christmas," Wensleydale volunteered. "All electric bits. There were a few knobs and dials in it. You can make a radio or a thing that goes beep." "I don't know," said Adam thoughtfully. "I'm thinking more of a certain people patching it into the worldwide military communications network and telling all the computers and stuff to start fighting." "Core," said Brian. "That'd be wicked." "Sort of," said Adam. It is a high and lonely destiny to be a chairman of the Lower Tadfield Residents Association. R.P. Tyler, short, well-fed, satisfied, stomped down a country lane, accompanied by his wife's miniature poodle, Shootsy. R.P. Tyler knew the difference between right and wrong. There were no moral grays of any kind in his life. He was not, however, satisfied simply with being vouchsafed the difference between right and wrong. He felt it was bound in duty. It was his bounden duty to tell the world. Not for R.P. Tyler, the soapbox, the polemic verse, the broadsheet. R.P. Tyler's chosen form was the letter column of the Tadfield Advertiser. If a neighbor's tree was inconsiderate enough to shed leaves into R.P. Tyler's garden, R.P. Tyler would first carefully sweep them all up, place them in boxes, and leave boxes outside his neighbor's front door with a stern note. He would write a letter to the Tadfield Advertiser. If he sighted teenagers sitting on the village green, their portable cassette players playing, and they were enjoying themselves, he would take it upon himself to point out to them the error of their ways, and after he had fled their jeering, he would write to Tadfield Advertiser on the decline of morality in the youth of today. Since his retirement last year, the letters had increased to the point where not even the Tadfield Advertiser was able to print all of them. Indeed, the letter R.P. Tyler had completed before setting out on his evening walk had begun. "Sirs, I note with distress that the newspapers of today no longer feel obligated to their public. We, the people who pay your wages." He surveyed the fallen branches that littered the narrow country road. "I don't suppose," he pondered, "they think of the cleaning up bill when they send us these storms. Parish council has to foot the bill to clean it up, and we, the taxpayers, pay their wages." And the "they" in this thought were the weather forecasters on Radio 4, whom R.P. Tyler blamed for the weather. He did not have a television, or as his wife put it, Ronald wouldn't have one of those things in the house, would you, Ronald? And he always agreed, although secretly he would have liked to have seen some of the smut and filth and violence that the National Viewers and Listeners Association complained of. Not because he wanted to see it, of course, just because he wanted to know what other people should be protected from. Shitzy stopped by a roadside beech tree to cock its leg. R.P. Tyler looked away embarrassed. It might be the sole purpose of his evening constitutional was to allow the dog to relieve itself. But he was dashed if he'd admit that to himself. He stared up at the storm clouds. They were banked up high in towering piles of smudged gray and black. It wasn't just the flickering tongues of lightning that poured through them, like the opening sequence of a Frankenstein movie. It was the way they stopped when they reached the borders of Lower Tadfield. And in their center was a circular patch of daylight, but the light had stretched the yellow quality to it like a forced smile. It was so quiet. There was a low roaring. Down the narrow lane came 4 motorbikes. They shot past him and turned the corner, disturbing a cock pheasant who whirred across the lane in a nervous arc of russet and green. "Vandals!" called R.P. Tyler after them. The countryside wasn't made for people like them. It was made for people like him. He jerked Schutz's lead, and they marched along the road. 5 minutes later, he turned down the corner to find 3 of the motorcyclists standing around a fallen signpost, a victim of the storm. The 4th, a tall man with a mirrored visor, remained on his bike. R.P. Tyler observed the situation and leapt effortlessly to a conclusion. These vandals, he had of course been right, had come to the countryside in order to desecrate the war memorial and overturn signposts. He was about to advance on them sternly when it came to him that he was outnumbered 4-1, and that they were taller than he was, and that they were undoubtedly violent psychopaths. No one but a violent psychopath rode motorbikes in R.P. Tyler's world. So he raised his chin and began to strut past them without apparently noticing they were there, all the while composing in his head a letter. "Sirs, this evening I noted with distress a large number of hooligans on motor bicycles infesting our fair village. Why, oh why, does the government do nothing about this plague of—" "Hi," said one of the motorcyclists, raising his visor to reveal a thin face and a trim black beard. "We're kind of lost." "Ah," said R.P. Tyler disapprovingly. "The signpost must have blew down," said the motorcyclist. "Yes, I suppose it must," agreed R.P. Tyler. He noticed with surprise that he was getting hungry. "Yeah, well, we're heading to Lower Tadfield," with an officious eyebrow raised. "You're Americans with the Air Force Base, I suppose?" "Sirs, when I did a national service, I was a credit to my country. I noticed with horror and dismay the airmen from the Tadfield Air Base are driving around our noble countryside dressed no better than common thugs. While I appreciate their importance in defending the freedom of the Western world," and his love of giving instructions took over. "You go back down that road for half a mile and then first left, and it's in a deplorable state of disrepair, I'm afraid. I've written numerous letters to the council about it. Are you civil servants or civil masters? That's why I ask them, after all, who pays your wages? Then, second right, it's not exactly right, it's on the left, but you'll find it bends around toward the right. Eventually, it's signposted Port's Lane, but of course it isn't Port's Lane. You look at the Ordnance Survey map and you'll see it's simply the eastern end of Forest Hill Lane. You'll come out in the village, and now you go past the Bull and the Fiddle. That's a public house. Then when you get to the church, I have pointed out to the people who compile the Ordnance Survey map that it's a church with a spire, not a church with a tower. Indeed, I have written to the Tadfield Advertiser suggesting they mount a local campaign to get the map corrected, and I have every hope that once these people realize with whom they are dealing, you'll see a hasty U-turn from them. Then you'll get to a crossroads. Now you'll go straight across that crossroads and you'll immediately come to the second crossroads. Now you can take either left-hand fork or go straight on. Either way, you'll arrive at the airbase. Although the left-hand fork is almost a tenth of a mile shorter, and you can't miss it. Famine stared at him blankly. I'm not sure I got that, he began. I did. Let us go. Schütze gave a little yelp and darted behind R.P. Tyler, where it remained shivering. The strangers climbed back onto their bikes, the one in white, a hippie by the look of him. Thought R.P. Tyler dropped an empty crisp packet onto the grass shoulder. "Excuse me," barked Tyler. "Is that your crisp packet?" "Oh, it's not just mine," said the boy. "It's everybody's." R.P. Tyler drew himself up to his full height. "Young man," he said, how would you feel if I came over to your house and dropped litter everywhere?" Pollution smiled wistfully, very, very pleased. He breathed, "Oh, that would be wonderful." Beneath his bike, an oil slick puddled a rainbow on the wet road. Engines revved. "I missed something," said War. "Now why are we meant to make a U-turn by the church?" "Just follow me," said the tall one in front, and the four rode off together. R.P. Tyler stared after them until his attention was distracted by the sound of something going clack, 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 clack. He turned. Four figures on the bicycle shot past him, closely followed by the scampering figure of a small dog. "You! Stop!" shouted R.P. Tyler. The them braked to a halt and looked at him. "I knew it was you, Adam Young, and your little, cabal. What, might I inquire, are you children doing out at this time of night? Do your fathers know you're out?" The leader of the cyclists turned. "I can't see how you can say it's late," he said. Seems to me that if the sun's still out, then it's not late." "It's past your bedtime anyway," R.P. Tyler informed them. "And don't stick out your tongue at me, young lady," this was to Pepper, "or I will be writing a letter to your mother informing her of the lamentable and unladylike state of her offspring's manners." "Well, excuse us," said Adam, aggrieved. "Pepper was just looking at you. I didn't know there was any law against looking." There was a commotion on the grass. Schütze, who was a particularly refined toy French poodle of the kind only possessed by people who were never able to fit children into their household budgets, was being menaced by a dog. "Master Young," ordered R.P. Tyler, "please get your mutt away from my Schütze." Tyler did not trust dog. When he had first met the dog 3 days ago, it had snarled at him and glowed its eyes red. This had impelled Tyler to begin a letter pointing out that dog was undoubtedly rabid, certainly a danger to the community, and should be put down for the general good, until his wife had reminded him that glowing red eyes weren't a symptom of rabies, or for that matter, anything seen outside of the kind of film that neither of the Tylers would be caught dead at, but knew all they needed to know about. "Thank you very much." Adam looked astounded. "Dog's not a mutt. Dog's a remarkable dog. He's clever." "Dog, you get off Mr. Tyler's horrible poodle." Dog ignored him. He got a lot of dog catching up still to do. "Dog," said Adam ominously. His dog slunk back to his master's bicycle. "Don't believe you've answered my question. Where are you four off to?" To the airbase, said Brian. If that's all right with you, said Adam, with what he hoped was bitter and scathing sarcasm. I mean, we won't want to go there if it wasn't all right with you, you cheeky little monkey, said R.P. Tyler. When I see your father, Adam Young, I will inform him in no uncertain terms that... But the them were already pedaling off down the road in the direction of Lower Tadfield Air Base, traveling by the them's route, which was shorter and simpler and more scenic than the route suggested by Mr. Tyler. R.P. Tyler had composed a lengthy mental letter on the failings of the youth of today. It covered falling educational standards, the lack of respect given to their elders and betters, the way they always seem to slouch these days instead of walking with a proper upright bearing, juvenile delinquency, and the return of compulsory national service, birching, flogging, and dog licenses. He was very satisfied with it. He had a sneaking suspicion that it would be too good for the Tadfield Advertiser, and had decided to send it to the Times. But. Excuse me, love, said a warm female voice. I think we're lost. It was an aging motor scooter, and it was being ridden by a middle-aged woman, clutching tightly. His eyes screwed shut was a rain-coated little man with a bright green crash helmet on. Sticking up between them was what appeared to be an antique gun with a funnel-shaped muzzle. Oh, where are you going? Lower Tadfield. I'm not sure of the exact address, but we're looking for someone, said the woman. Then, in a totally different voice, she said, his name is Adam Young. R.P. Tyler boggled. You want that boy? He asked. What's he done now? No, don't tell me. I don't want to know. Boy, said the woman. You didn't tell me he was a boy. How old is he? Then she said, he's 11. Well, I get it, like the 11th hour. Never mind. Okay. I'm putting two and two together. Well, I do wish you'd mentioned this before. It puts a completely different complexion on things. R.P. Tyler just stared, then realized what was going on. The woman was a ventriloquist. What he had taken for a man in a green crash helmet, he now saw was a ventriloquist dummy. He wondered how he could ever have assumed it was human. He felt the whole thing was in vaguely bad taste. I saw Adam Young not 5 minutes ago, he told the woman. He and his little cronies were on their way to the American Air Base. Oh dear, said the woman, paling slightly. I've never really liked the Yanks. They're really very nice people, you know, yes, but you can't trust people who pick up the ball all the time when they play football. Excuse me, said R.P. Tyler. I think it's very good, very impressive. I'm duty chairman of the local Rotary Club, and I was wondering, do you do private functions only on Thursdays? Said Madame Tracy disapprovingly. And I charge extra? And I wonder if you could direct us to... Mr. Tyler had been here before. He wordlessly extended a finger. The little scooter went pop down the narrow country lane. As it did so, the gray dummy in the green helmet turned around and opened one eye. "You great southern pillock," it croaked. R.P. Tyler was offended, but also disappointed. He had hoped it would be more lifelike. R.P. Tyler, only 10 minutes away from the village, paused while Shootsy attempted another of its wide-range eliminatory functions. He gazed over the fence. He acknowledged his knowledge of country lore was a little hazy, but he felt fairly sure that if the cows lay down it meant rain, and if they were standing, it would probably be fine. These cows were taking it in turns to execute slow and solemn somersaults, and Tyler wondered what it presaged for the weather. What it presaged? Okay, yeah. He sniffed. Something was burning. There was an unpleasant smell of scorched metal and rubber and leather. "Excuse me," said a voice from behind him. R.P. Tyler turned around. There was a large, once black car on fire in the lane, and a man in sunglasses was leaning out of the window, saying through smoke, "I'm sorry, I've managed to get a little lost. Can you direct me to Lower Tadfield Air Base? I know it's around here somewhere. Your car is on fire." No, Tyler just couldn't bring himself to say it. I mean, the man had to know that, didn't he? He was sitting in the middle of it. Possibly it was some kind of practical joke. So instead, he said, "I think you must have taken a wrong turn about a mile back. Signpost is blown down." The stranger smiled. "That must be it," he said. The orange flames flickering below gave him an almost infernal appearance. The wind blew toward Tyler across the car, and he felt his eyebrows frizzle. "Excuse me, young man, but your car is on fire, and you're sitting in it without burning, and incidentally, it's red hot in places." No. Should he ask the man if he wanted him to phone the AA? Instead, he explained the route carefully, trying not to stare. "That's terrific, much obliged," said Crowley as he began to wind up the window. Here, 1 second. R.P. Tyler had something to say. "Excuse me, young man," he said. "Yes? I mean, it's not the kind of thing you don't notice your car being on fire." A tongue of flame licked across a charred dashboard. "Funny weather we're having, isn't it?" He said lamely. "Is it?" said Crowley. "I honestly hadn't noticed." He reversed back down the country lane in his burning car. "It's probably because your car's on fire," said R.P. Tyler sharply. He jerked Shootsy's lead and dragged the little dog to heel. To the editor. "Sir, I would like to draw your attention to a recent tendency I've noticed for today's young people to ignore perfectly sensible safety precautions while driving. This evening I was asked for directions by a gentleman whose car was, driving a car that, it was on fire." His temper getting worse, R.P. Tyler stomped the final stretch back into the village. "Oi!" shouted R.P. Tyler Young. "Wait. Oi!" shouted R.P. Tyler. "Young!" Mr. Young was in his front garden, sitting on his deck chair, smoking his pipe. This had more to do with Deidre's recent discovery of the menace of passive smoking and banning of smoking in the house than he would care to admit to his neighbors. It did not improve his temper. Neither did being addressed as Young by Mr. Tyler. "Yes?" "Your son Adam," Mr. Young sighed. "What's he done now?" "Do you know where he is?" Mr. Young checked his watch. "Getting ready for bed, I assume." Tyler grinned tightly, triumphantly. "I doubt it. I saw him and his little fiends and that appalling mongrel not a half hour ago, cycling toward the airbase." Mr. Young puffed on his pipe. "You know how strict they are up there," said Mr. Tyler, in case Mr. Young hadn't got the message. "You know what one your son is for, pressing buttons and things," he added. Mr. Young took his pipe out of his mouth and examined the stem thoughtfully. He said. "I see." He said. "Right," he said, and he went inside. Alright, we are going to stop here as we near closer to the end, and then we'll be back with more of this book later, perhaps even today if I find the time. So I bid you adieu. Namaste. Love you guys. See you soon.